Hello. If this is the first time you've listened to the Reider Report, welcome. If you're a returning listener, I'm glad you're back. But for all of you, if you've ever gotten into a tough situation as a pilot and learned some valuable lessons, I'd like to hear your story and consider having you as a guest on the podcast. Shoot me an email, rob@avbrief.com. Now, on with the podcast. A life devoted to flying is the dream for a lot of people around the world. For some, it's for personal business or pleasure. For others, it's a career. Irrespective of what we fly or how much we fly, there may be situations that put us near the edge of the envelope of the aircraft and at the limits of our capabilities. Today, we'll hear from a high-time professional pilot who will share what he learned from a Tiger Moth, a Baron, a Chieftain, and a Lear jet on this episode of The Reider Report. Hello everyone, I'm Rob Reider and welcome to episode 14 of AvBrief's The Reider Report podcast, brought to you by Avemco Insurance. My guest today has accumulated more than 15,000 hours flying airliners, biz jets, light twins, and vintage biplanes, and has never stopped learning. From dealing with landing issues in a Tiger Moth, to having a student botch an engine-out procedure in a light twin, to an issue with improper maintenance and a near snap roll in a Learjet, pilot and author Mark Blois-Brooke will join me right after this message from Avemco. If Oshkosh is on your flight plan this summer, be sure to add Hangar A, booth 1158 to your list. Team Avemco will be there all week, answering questions and helping pilots understand their insurance options. Stop by and say hello. Grab your free Avemco hat and other swag while you're there, while supplies last, of course. Call 800-353-9089 or visit www.avemco.com/Reider Report. Mention the Reider Report and receive 5% off your insurance premium. Premium memberships are subject to underwriting guidelines, including Avemco-recognized training and memberships. Now, the Reider Report. My guest today on the program is a guy with whom I have become friends, even though we live on opposite sides of the Atlantic. He was a guest on the other podcast because he had some amazing stories, and he's got another one or two for us today. Mark Brooke, welcome to the Reider Report.
Thank you, Rob. Pleasure to be here.
Mark, on our previous visit, you told me a couple of stories that involved very different aircraft and required very different strategies in how you handled the incidents. So let's recap and start with what happened when you were flying the de Havilland Tiger Moth, a 1930s vintage British biplane trainer.
Yeah, that episode was a long time back now, but I was landing on a farm strip in Norfolk, very remote strip, about 300-400 meters long probably, but with quite a steep gradient. And I was faced with the choice of landing downhill into wind or upwind with tailwind. My instinct told me to land upwind with a tailwind was absolutely the wrong thing to do. I went around off that one and then came back and landed downhill into wind and stopped in half the distance. And I guess what I learned about that was the tremendous effect a tailwind has on performance, particularly with a tailwheel aircraft that has no brakes and a lot of wing aspect to kind of push it up a slope. So that was got the heart rate up a little bit. That was that event.
I'm sure you didn't want to break a vintage airplane. Was that your airplane? Did you own it at the time?
Yeah, it was. I owned it. I did pleasure flights, or to be strictly correct, I suppose they're called trial lessons, because you don't need like a Part 135 AOC situation for that. But effectively, they were pleasure flights, and I was on my own. I was positioning to this farm strip. I didn't have a passenger with me, luckily. But that was a salutary lesson for sure. So bearing in mind the Tiger Moth has no brakes at all, I thought landing downhill would be not so good. And in fact, because it was into wind, it was fine. So it does show the effect of wind on performance, definitely.
And you also had an incident with a Beechcraft Baron through no fault of your own, it was making things really dicey for you.
Yeah, that was another story, which I think had the weather been not so good would have been, or had I suffered an engine failure or whatever, would have been pretty bad. I was picking up a Baron 58 that I used to fly regularly off maintenance. And so during the walk around, I did all the usual stuff, but I didn't check one thing that I really should have seen. And that was that the trim tab on the elevator was incorrectly positioned. It was pointing up, not pointing down, so it had been set up in reverse. Consequence of that was that the faster I went down the runway on takeoff, the more and more nose heavy the aircraft became. And it was a short runway to take off from, so I didn't have a chance to stop. I had to get airborne. And of course, the Baron accelerates pretty quickly, and the nose down force was getting worse and worse and worse. And I was desperately trying to figure out what the issue was. Decided not to touch anything, not to touch the flaps or anything, did a quick circuit and came back in and landed pretty fast, and could barely, had enough strength to get one hand off the control column to get the throttles. It was a really quite scary moment. And when I landed and the engineer came out to ask what was wrong, I think my language was probably quite fruity. And I said, there's something wrong with this aircraft. And when we looked at it, we saw that the trim tab had been incorrectly installed incorrectly. So it was actually working in reverse sense. So the more nose up, the more nose down it was. So the lessons from that one, I guess, triple check everything when an aircraft comes out of maintenance.
Boy, oh boy, those first test flights, I've seen people after an annual or a condition inspection take off and just go someplace. And most of the guys that I know, though, say stay right within the pattern. So if something does go wrong, even if you have to go up 5,000 or 6,000 feet to wring the airplane out, if something does go wrong, you've got pavement on which to land, or at least a good hunk of grass.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's absolutely good advice. Yeah. The funny thing about that one was that obviously any control inspection is a dual inspection. So two guys must have signed this off. That's the extraordinary thing. And two guys missed the fact that it had been incorrectly installed. Astonishing, but that's human factors. It can happen.
And you were using electric trim on the Baron, correct? Or did you reach down and grab the wheel?
I grabbed down. No, it has electric trim, obviously, but I was just using the wheel essentially. But these things happen very quickly, don't they? So you get airborne at 100 knots. Pretty soon you're doing 130, 40 knots, whatever. I couldn't actually let go or release pressure off the yoke sufficient to release one hand off the throttles to pick the gear up. The gear stayed down the whole time. I literally didn't have the strength to do that. So I just went around the pattern pretty quickly, and it was a tremendous strain. I was really holding the nose up. Landed flapless pretty fast on this fairly short runway, skidded to a halt at the end and shut it down, and sat there sort of trembling for 5 minutes.
I bet. The serious pucker factor. Mark, your career as a pilot includes the airlines. For those who have, many who are listening to this probably are not familiar with your career, and I'd love for you to tell me a little bit about how your flying went, because it will lead as an instructor to what we're going to be talking about today. Where did your journey begin, and how did it feel, and what happened for you as an aviator?
I got my private license back in 1976, which I've just realized with horror is like 50 years ago. But in the summer of 70, cannot believe it, summer of 76, which in the UK was a gloriously hot summer, so long dry days, which is rare in this country. And I managed to get through it fairly quickly because I was working offshore at sea with lots of cash, single guy, nice weather. So, it didn't take too long. From that, I went into instructed a little bit in the States, came back, instructed in the UK, got enough hours to get my CPLs, which in those days was 700 hours required. Before you could sit the exams, it's all a little different now. I got a CPL, worked for an air taxi company, so flying the Baron we're talking about, Golden Eagle. Moved on from there to another company flying an Islander, rather gloss over that one fairly quickly. And then to a company based at Gatwick, which is where one of these stories comes from. We were operating PA-31 Chieftains, Cessna 404s, Learjet, King Air, Hawkers, and a whole bunch of stuff in the 80s at a time when there was a lot of cash in the economy and things were pretty good. And the charter side of things was excellent. We were back-to-backing trips and it was a busy time.
You had a lot of
there,
type ratings then, didn't you?
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, over the years, quite a few. But I didn't stay there too long. Well, I didn't stay there too long. It's probably 9 or 10 years in the end. And then I went into the airlines. I flew for a company called Air Contractors, who basically contracted to companies like FedEx, TNT, French Post, all the big cargo companies, flying 727s for 2.5 years, I think, and then onto the wide-body A300 for about 10 years. Which is great. I thoroughly enjoyed all of that. It was good fun. It was hard work. Night flying takes its toll on you, no question about it. And after a while, I thought, it's time to get out. I don't think it's a particularly healthy lifestyle. So I got out, went back into corporate flying, which is my kind of first love. Flew for BP, the oil company, for 2.5 years on a G5, and then joined TAG Aviation in the UK. And with them, I flew the 550, the Challenger 605, and my current seat is a Falcon 7X. So that's where we are.
Lovely. And those airplanes have everything, including not only the galley and everything in it, but probably in terms of avionics and the bells and whistles helps make your flying very, very pleasant.
Yeah, it's funny looking back over the years how things have moved on. Things, I guess, in terms of situational awareness, are so immensely different to what they were a few years ago. So yeah, the business jets are sort of kind of cutting edge of that stuff now. So and an absolute joy. And I would say probably the Gulfstream, in fact, the Gulfstream Challenger and 7X are all superb aircraft. They've all got great avionics and they do different jobs, but they all do them very well.
Indeed. Well, let's go now to the first of two stories that I want to discuss with you. And it involves your instructing in a Piper PA-31 Chieftain. Give us the full lowdown. What happened? When was this?
Yeah, this was back in the 80s. And at the time, the company I was working for was an air charter company. I was based at Gatwick Airport, which is London's second major airport, second to Heathrow. Quite difficult to be based there these days, but in those days it was easy enough. And we picked up an awful lot of work doing AOG stuff for airlines and late passengers and all that stuff. It was a boom time. We were busy and we used quite a few freelance pilots on the piston fleet, the PA-31 and the Cessna 404 Titan. And one of the pilots we used was a captain from a major airline. And I won't reveal his name, to save his blushes, but let's, for the sake of argument, call him Paul. Paul was a very competent air pilot, as you'd expect. He took flying, these smaller aircraft just as seriously as he took flying his 747. He was always keen to learn stuff, always jotting down notes when we flew together. He's a very conscientious guy. And come the day, it was time for his 6-monthly proficiency check. So we meet up at the General Aviation Terminal at Gatwick, have a quick brief about all aspects of the flight, as is normal, and make our way out to the aircraft. I recall that the start-up, the taxi out is all normal. His checks and airmanship are excellent, as you'd expect. And I sort of think, well, so far so normal, and I kind of relax a little bit. I was fairly certain this was going to be an easy flight and a good check on his part. So the tower clears us the line up on the runway, and Paul gently advances the throttles and we start accelerating down the runway, smoothly get airborne. He pops the wheels up and they tuck away with a clunk and we're away. As we're passing about 300 feet or so, it's time for me to do my job and kind of get to work on the check. So I covered the throttles with a map, like a sectional or something, just so we can't see what I'm doing, and slowly bring the left engine to idle to simulate an engine failure right after takeoff. It's all standard stuff, and it's the normal way to start a proficiency check to climb out single engine. So, as you can expect, the pilot is expected to keep the aircraft straight, with the rudder climbing out at the correct speeds for the single engine. And once this is done, he would then talk through his, what we call touch drills, just like what he would do in the real event, like, close the throttle, feather the engine, full power on the good engine and all that stuff. For safety reasons, obviously, we never completely feathered the engine at 300 feet. That wouldn't be a safe thing to do. We just simulated it by bringing it back to idle. So this is where it starts to get quite interesting, because for some inexplicable reason, as I bring the left throttle to idle, Paul, instead of putting right rudder in to keep the aircraft straight, puts full left rudder in, which is absolutely the wrong action, as you could imagine.
So in other words,
now,
he is giving all the energy to the good engine, which is causing not only a sharp bank to the left, but a potential snap roll.
Yeah, it takes me completely by surprise, because it never occurred to me that anyone would do that. I would expect him to apply smooth right rudder and we'd climb away and be no drama, but he puts in left rudder. So now the right engine and the left rudder are working together to basically turn us on our back. So the right wing rises sharply, and suddenly I'm looking through the windscreen, I'm looking at grass. It's like only 200 or 300 feet beneath us.
Oh, boy.
So I shout to him, I have the aeroplane, he lets go, and I put in right rudder and as much aileron as I dare, and slowly the aircraft rights itself and we start to climb away, but the speed is pretty slow at this point. We're below safety speed. So I'm very, very gentle with the controls, and eventually we pick up speed as I add some more power from the left engine and we climb away. So the tower then hands us off to radar. They don't make any comment, although they must have seen what happened because they saw an airplane go nearly on its side. And I said to Paul, what on earth are you doing? I mean, I was really shocked at his action. And his reaction is, he's kind of white-faced, really. And I know what's going through his mind. He's living that moment that pilots get sometimes when they know that they've messed up royally in front of one of their peers. And I know he's thinking something along the lines, I'm a senior 747 training captain and I've messed up on this little airplane. And he's obviously very embarrassed and a little shocked at his action. And he said, I'm sorry, I don't know why I did that. We kind of cancelled the test and did a quick circuit and came back in and landed and chatted about it. So it was an interesting event. I don't think I was particularly complacent, but maybe I sort of dropped my guard a bit, thinking that here's a highly experienced guy who won't have any problems flying this airplane, and he does exactly the wrong action at a critical moment.
Mark, did you ever figure out how much altitude you lost when that left rudder got applied?
Good question. I started the whole thing, the simulated engine failure, at about 400 feet probably. That was standard. So we probably lost a couple of 100 feet. I would say we're fairly close to the field. I mean, the windscreen was all green. I remember that.
Oh,
Put
boy.
it that way. People say, what did you do? And it's very hard to analyze what you do, but you just act on instinct. So, and I didn't really have time to think cleverly about and it all worked, fortunately. So by putting in full right rudder and easing up the power on the left engine, I managed to stabilize the aircraft, dip the nose a little bit to pick up some speed so we could climb away, and away we went. But it was done really, my recovery was done more on instinct than any kind of clever thinking.
Well, from the chieftain and a problem with somebody else's work to, let's talk about Lear jets. We go from pistons to Lear jets, one of the highest. Back in its day, back in the 80s, it was still almost a fighter jet in some people's minds. What happened to the Lear jet, and when was that?
This was probably, when did we the company got rid of the Lear jet in sort of 95, I think, something like that. So probably early 90s, I'm guessing. I was a type rating examiner on the aircraft, so I did a lot of proficiency checks on it and air tests and so on and so forth. And I was familiar with the aircraft. I had a couple of thousand hours on it, and it is one of my favorite aircraft. Anyone who's flown one will agree it's an awesome machine. It's fantastic to fly. It's not good to operate. It's very old-fashioned, but to fly, it just puts a smile on your face.
What version was it? Was it a 25, 35, or a 45?
It was a 35. It was a 35A, which we did a lot of work doing a lot of air ambulance work, actually, because, it's got a pretty big passenger door. It's about 3 feet wide, something like that. So you can get a stretcher in quite easily. It's got reasonable range. So we did a lot of ambulance work around Africa and the Middle East and stuff like that, and also VIP stuff, a whole mixture of things, really. We didn't turn any work away.
And what happened on this particular day?
Well, it was time for the C of A renewal. And in those days, I don't think it's quite the same now, but you had to do an annual air test. And that involved checking all the systems on the aircraft, the hydraulics, the bleed air system, pressurization, engine parameters, yada, yada, yada. There was a long list of stuff you had to go through. Took probably a couple of hours or so. And as I was the type rating examiner on the airplane, I had the CAA approval to do the flights. It's fine. You take your time, you brief it well, and you just plow through it and get it done. The only bit none of us particularly enjoyed was the stall that you had to do, or several stalls, really.
Why is that?
The Learjet wing, although it's been modified a lot over the years, it wasn't quite as bad as the earlier models, was still an unpredictable. It's a very thin wing and quite unpredictable at the stall. So in common with a lot of T-tail jets, it had systems to stop you getting into the stall. But the CAA, in their infinite wisdom, decided that you had to test the schedule to make sure that the stick shaker and the stick pusher came in on schedule.
And by the way, the CAA is the Civilian Aviation Authority. Is that what it is in Great Britain?
Yeah, Civil Aviation Authority. Yeah, it's the equivalent of the FAA in the States.
Yeah.
Very similar authority. So the stick shaker is, for those who are not familiar with this, it's a device on the control column that it kind of rattles and shakes when you get close to a stall, 7 to 10 knots, something like that, to warn you that there's a stall coming. And then if you do nothing about it, there's a stick pusher on the Learjet, which snatches the control column forward to literally push the nose down and get you out of the stall. Really good systems designed to keep everybody safe. So you might well ask me, why mess around with it? Just let it be. But as I say, the CA wanted to check that these things worked on schedule. So come the day, I'm doing one of these C of A air tests on the Lear. And as I recall, all the systems checks were fine. The pressurization, the electrical bleed air system, all that stuff worked great. And we climbed to 15,000 feet to do the stalls. The first one on the schedule to check the speed when the stick shaker activates is in the clean configuration, i.e. with no flaps and the gear retracted. So I select the engine ignitions on, reduce the speed, 2 knots per second, everything nice and steady, and the airplane stalls pretty much on schedule, and everything's fine. We then go on to the next one with gear down and flap down. Now, Martin, the guy I'm flying with, and I get our heads together. We spend a bit of time going through the AFM, checking really carefully that we got the right speeds for the CFG and the weight and all the rest of it. And come back out straight and level to do the second set of stalls. The speeds, I've got a little note here because I've been looking at it the other day. It's about 106 for the shaker, something like that, 97 for the pusher, something in that region. So with those speeds in our heads, we set up for the stall. At 106 knots, the stick shaker starts rattling. That's great. That's pretty much as we expected it. So we think our computations are correct. Speed comes back, 105, 104, 103. The speed reduces. The shaker is rattling the stick all the time, as you'd expect. And nothing, there's no pusher at all at the speed that we expect, which is around 95, 96 knots. Speed comes back. And then at around 94, 95 knots, I can only describe it as all hell breaks loose.
Oh, gosh.
The aircraft flicks violently to the left as the left wing stalls and the right wing rises. And to compound the situation, just at that time, the stick pusher kicks in. So we're now almost inverted with the stick pusher kicking in, which slams the control column forward.
Exacerbating the problem.
Yeah, really. So I push forward, power as much power as I can, lower the nose, and we climb out of the stall. And eventually the stick shaker stops and we climb away to safe speed and consider what had just happened. Martin and I remember we looked at each other and we just said, we are never doing this again. This is something I've absolutely... This is test pilot stuff, we're competent pilots, but stalling Lears and stuff is not the sort of thing that the average line pilot should get involved in, I don't think. I think we lost probably 5,000 feet in that maneuver.
I was
something in
going
that
to
region.
ask that very question.
Yeah, I would think so. We probably rolled out at 10,000 feet, something like that.
That's an incredibly fast loss of altitude.
Seriously, yeah. And I think because, the stick pusher pushed at just the wrong moment when we're almost inverted anyway, he kind of pushed it. It was, it was an interesting time. So we just agreed, look, let's just say everything works according to schedule and just write it up and never do this again, which is what we did. But the funny thing is there was a positive out of it, because previous to that, the autopilot was never particularly reliable. But after that event, it worked great. And I just wondered whether in the course of that kind of fairly violent maneuver, we'd jiggled a gyro or something, because after that, the autopilot worked great. So there was a positive that came out of it.
Oh, I am not at all sure that's how I would want to check the functionality of an autopilot or any other piece of gear, by doing a flick or a snap roll in a jet. Mark, let's take a break. And when we get back, we'll check out the takeaways and the lessons that you learned through these incidents. We'll be right back.
Sure thing.
If Oshkosh is on your flight plan this summer, be sure to add Hangar A, booth 1158 to your list. Team of EMCO will be there all week, answering questions and helping pilots understand their insurance options. Stop by and say hello. Grab your free Avemco hat and other swag while you're there, while supplies last, of course. Call 800-353-9089 or visit www.avemco.com/Rider Report. Mention the Rider Report and receive 5% off your insurance premium. Premium memberships are subject to underwriting guidelines, including Avemco-recognized training and memberships. Now, the Rider Report. We're back with Mark Brooke, who has his two stories with the Chieftain and the Lear jet and lessons learned. And let's start, Mark, with the Chieftain. There is a question that I have with respect to doing that engine failure on takeoff maneuver, where it might be simulated just like when we practice stalls. We go up to 3 in a light plane, in a single go up to 3,000, 3,500 feet to practice stalls, both power on and power off. Is that something that you might have done that would have prevented that incident from taking place? How do you answer that?
Yeah, it's a very good point. The part of the proficiency check is, like in any sort of multi-engine aircraft, is to show that you can cope with an engine failure on departure, on takeoff. It kind of, I wouldn't say immediately after takeoff, but at some point after takeoff. So that's why we tended to do this at 300 or 400 feet when you're safely away from the ground, the gear's tucked away and you're climbing away, and then you would simulate the failure and see how the pilot responds and climbs away. I mean, in hindsight, possibly 300, 400 feet is a little low. Maybe I could have waited sort of 400, 500, 600 feet, give us slightly better margin. Yes, that's true. But it's a good point. But it has to be realistic, obviously, for to pass the proficiency.
So if you're going up to 3,000 feet, so okay, now we're going to simulate an engine failure on takeoff. The mindset of the student or the person getting the proficiency check is already cued in to what to do and how it would feel. And so I understand why you would want to do that. What did you learn about yourself as an instructor during that particular incident?
Another big takeaway is, which I've learned, we've seen a lot subsequently, is that pilots, like any people, they're flawed. They make mistakes. And sometimes they react strangely, inexplicably to events and do completely the opposite to what either they know they should do or act by instinct wrongly. You have to expect the unexpected, and particularly in training events. Training an aircraft is frowned upon these days. There's not much option to do anything else in the light twin. There are no simulators. You have to do it in the real airplane. We don't do that in jets. We use simulators. But it does pay, particularly in light aircraft, to be super vigilant and to, as I say, to expect the unexpected. And I was, as I say, possibly a little complacent. I kind of deferred to this chap's, huge experience, not relevant experience, and that's another possible argument, it's not relevant experience as a highly experienced pilot, but not in light twins. And I was possibly a little bit complacent in that respect, looking back on it.
Very interesting indeed. Let's go to the Lear jet and the stick shaker, and something that I've never flown in an airplane that has a stick shaker, but I can certainly feel when the airplane I'm flying is getting mushy, and that when the controls seem to all loosen up a little bit. What takeaways do you have with that particular incident?
I think it's just more sort of observations, really. I mean, we knew that stalling a Lear, you do need height because all stalls are unpredictable, particularly with that wing. The Learjet wing is very thin. It is critical. Even a few bugs on the leading edge can affect the stall characteristics. So
Really?
you do need height. Oh,
Holy
definitely,
cow.
definitely. It's an interesting aircraft. It's an interesting wing. It's not a super critical wing, but it is an interesting wing. So you do have to be careful. Whereas 3,000 feet might be fine for a light aircraft, 15,000 feet is definitely what you need in any jet, I would suggest. And we had that. We had that altitude. We weren't casual about that at all. So that was a fine. But as I say, every stall, like every spin, like any maneuver in an aircraft, every time you do it, the dynamics are slightly different. And on this occasion, it certainly turned out that way. It did flick. The wing did flick as the speed came back. And it's just our bad luck that exactly that moment the stick pusher kicked in, which kind of compounded the issue. So lessons taken away, leave it to the experts. I'm a competent pilot. Martin's a competent pilot. We can fly the aircraft well day to day. We don't stall the airplane routinely. Now, I have been very lucky over the years. I've flown with some test pilots to whom this is their bread and butter. They do this every day. I had great privilege of flying with Pete Reynolds in the 80s, who I think was the chief test pilot of Learjet in Tucson when they were down there. And he knew how to fly that airplane absolutely beautifully, fingertip control, absolutely on the edge of things all the time, because that was his job. And I've flown with a Dassault test pilot in the Falcon. And these guys are great because that's what they do every day, day in, day out. Great to watch them. But of course, a line pilot does this once a year, if ever. So leave it to the experts, I think. And just as another observation, these airplanes are designed not to be stalled, which is why they have all the protections that are built in. I don't know if the CAA still go along with this now of asking you to do a COA air test, including stalling anymore. I just don't think it's a safe thing to do. I haven't been asked to do one since, so hopefully that won't arise.
Well, if you're vigilant and aware and you've got enough time in a particular airplane, you'll learn its quirks and noises and behavior, and you'll be alerted if something is out of the ordinary.
Yes, all airplanes talk to you, don't they? You can tell pretty much what the speed is by listening to it to a large extent. You certainly can for example, in the Tiger Moth, I knew exactly what the speed was simply by the wind going past me, the sound, it's within a couple of knots. The airplanes do talk to you. And jet aircraft are the same. You can tell by the amount of noise there is in the cockpit pretty much what speed you're doing.
Are these stories in your book?
Yes, they are both in the book, I believe, yeah.
Well, this is a perfect time to give it a plug. Life in a Tin, Stories of a Flying Life. How did you, what prompted you to write the book?
Yeah, the history is I wrote the book really for the family because during lockdown, like a lot of people, you have time on your hands. And I just thought I'd just jot some stories down, and one thing led to another, and one story reminds you of another one, and before you know it, you've got a book on your hands. And somebody said, why don't you publish it? And I thought, no one's going to be interested. But I did anyway. I kind of self-published it and popped it onto Amazon. And it sold really well, which is, it's not going to affect my retirement plans, but it's gratifying that that people have bought it. So, yeah, you can find it on Amazon.
Mark Blois-Brooke, thank you for being a guest. Thank you for becoming a friend. And thank you for sharing what you learned here on The Reider Report.
Thanks, Rob. As always, it's a pleasure. And keep up the good work. I think all the stories, there's so much to learn from guys' experiences. Humbling and interesting at the same time. So keep up the good work.
Thanks. Mark's book, Life in a Tin, Stories from a Flying Life is available on Amazon. For clarification, Mark's full name is Mark Blois-Brooke. That's spelled Blois-Brooke. Check it out. It's good reading. Thanks for joining us for some hangar flying that you can take with you anywhere, anytime. We drop episodes every couple of weeks so you can hear the first-hand accounts of the flying lessons that sometimes only experience can teach. I'm so appreciative of how you've shared this podcast with your friends. It's gratifying on multiple levels. Most importantly, that we can learn so much from the experiences of others. It's the reason that AvBrief, Avemco, and I produce this podcast, to reach as many pilots as we can to make us all safer aviators. The Reider Report theme and commercial instrumental music for the podcast was written and performed by Rob Pottorff. For Avemco Aviation Insurance and avbrief.com, I'm Rob Reider. Catch you next time on The Reider Report.